If you like these videos, please check out my full course at www.lsat.totaltestprep.net with tons of clearly explained actual LSAT questions written by someone who's mastered test and helped others master it, and an evaluation period where you only pay if you want to continue.
Alright, in this video we're going to cover the conclusion questions. So, what is the conclusion question? So what do these questions ask for? So in other words, what does it mean to identify the conclusion of an argument? And how do these questions, how do these questions appear in the test? And how do we approach these questions? Okay, so in terms of the basic information, conclusion questions basically ask you to identify the author's main point in the argument. Now, the law deals with arguments, and in order to create an argument and know what you're responding to, you need to be clear on the main point. So these questions will generally deal with arguments. If there's no argument, then the premises will be structured to lead to a conclusion. So it won't always be an argument, a complete argument. It may be missing the conclusion, and then that's what you're looking for in the choices. And the question will generally deal with one speaker, though there might be multiple perspectives. And in fact, most commonly you will find multiple perspectives. And if there are multiple speakers, so not multiple perspectives, if there are multiple speakers, then the question will tell you where to focus, so which one of the speakers to focus on. And the answer choices will be information which has to be true, or rather the correct answer choice is going to be information that has to be true. In terms of the basic approach, you need to identify the relationships between the statements in the argument and identify the statement that is supported by all. So the most important thing is to identify the relationships in the argument. You want to be careful with the conclusion indicators, though, because the test will try to trick you. If it's the last sentence and there's a conclusion indicator introducing that sentence, it's almost certainly a sub-conclusion, not the overall conclusion. So you want to relate the statements as you read them and identify the one which is supported directly or indirectly through other statements by the rest of the statements. And the statements are either going to be the conclusion, support for the conclusion, which includes sub-conclusions, or context. And you want to be on the lookout for the complex structure type where the author responds to another perspective. This is, like I said, something that's going to be very common for this question type. Likewise, you want to evaluate the different types to get an idea of the basic structure of the argument, because being sensitive to the different types of arguments, correlation, causation, explanation, etc., will make it easier to recognize the relationships between the statements. Okay. So you also need to go, once you do that, you need to go through the answer choices looking for the one which expresses the conclusion. Now, the correct choice will either restate the conclusion or state the conclusion that the statements are pointing towards. So you're either going to have the conclusion already in the argument, or it's going to be something that the statements in the paragraph are leading you towards. So it may not actually, if it is in the argument, it may not restate it in necessarily the same exact words. You want to be careful with that. The incorrect choice is either going to be new information or a restatement of a supporting statement or context. So a restatement of something that's not the conclusion. And you want to be careful with context, since it's usually a general statement. So just because the statement is the most general in the argument, that does not mean that it's the conclusion. So just because it's the most general, don't automatically assume it's the conclusion. Even if it is the most general statement, it's not the conclusion unless it's supported by everything else. That's what makes the conclusion the conclusion. It's supported by the other information directly or indirectly. The most general statements could simply be context. If they're assumed to be true, they're not the conclusion because they're not given any support. And of course, you want to be careful with sub-conclusions. So in addition to all that, you basically need to have a clear understanding of the argument, and you need to be able to identify the relevant choice. So go through the answer choices, looking for the one which gives you a reason to accept the conclusion, and the correct choice will make the conclusion more likely.